While Max and Alex are away, here are a few of the best bits from the last couple of years of the Sunday Roast.
I think that's what we're all trying to do, aren't we? We're all trying to make our little difference here and there with a bit of a voice. Although some of us on the BBC seem to be able to absolutely trounce any opposition that come up. I think you took on Gullis, didn't you, as well, in the committee, Zoe?
I had my moment against Gullis in the committee. I had another debate with him on Talk TV at one point. He's just, the thing is, like, in the committee, it was great because this was the Bill Committee on not the most recent anti-migration piece of legislation that the government passed, but the last anti-migration piece of legislation they passed. And this was the committee of MPs that scrutinizes the bill. And the great thing about that space is they have to let you talk. Like, you are there to give evidence. It's not a sort of media debate. So I had to be given the space to respond with the factual evidence to the question he asked me. And that's why that video of me giving that response, everybody's like, this is amazing. It's like, yeah, because we never get the opportunity to give that kind of a factual based, like, answer to the questions about immigration when we're talking about it in the news.
One then, Chair, which is, if these people in Calais are legitimate refugees, why are they not claiming asylum in France, Italy, Spain or Greece? Why do they need to come to the United Kingdom?
Many of them have. As I'm sure you'll be aware, because I think the previous witness did say this, the vast majority of people who seek asylum worldwide, firstly, 86% of refugees and displaced people worldwide remain in the country neighbouring the one they have fled. So 86% of people remain in developing countries. France received 3 times as many asylum applications as we did last year. Most people stop as soon as they feel safe. But the people who are making their way to England and who specifically wish to come to the UK do so because they have ties to this country, because they either have served with our military, as in the case of people from Afghanistan, or have family members, as with the Syrian client that I mentioned, that JCWI is representing, or speak the language because of our colonial history and have other ties of kinship and history here. So there are people who have legitimate ties to the UK, and there is no good reason why they should particularly have their claims assessed in France if they do not wish to. It doesn't really work for us to say to the French that, given that we're geographically located slightly to the west of you, none of these refugees are our responsibility and they're all on you, because France can say the same thing, and then Italy can say the same thing, and then the entire international refugee protection system will crumble.
Part of the reason why we made this a long format, I mean, we were considering doing an even longer format because there's some topics that you can't go over in 15 minutes, in half an hour, even an hour. So I'm gonna put on the devil's hat now, which is cleverly said. I did check this. The UNHCR, so the United Nations body for dealing with refugees, is working in Rwanda. What is the reasoning behind that? Like, if the UN is saying we're working with you, and from what I could tell, they're pumping in money to infrastructure, into building wells, into education. I've got a theory, by the way, I'll bring up in a minute. I think it's quite an interesting one. But they're building wells, they're building infrastructure, they're building schools. I think there's some electrical work being built, all financed through the UN. Why is that happening if Rwanda's so bad?
Well, okay, so the UN as a whole and UNHCR, which is the refugee body of the UN, are slightly, well, they're not different. One is part of the other, but the UN is an intergovernmental organization. So every country in the world, including all the really, really, really bad ones where we wouldn't want to send refugees, are members of the UN. So the involvement of the UN in any one individual country says nothing about how good it is of a country in any particular way. Then the fact that UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, works within Rwanda is really interesting, because UNHCR was one of the key witnesses that provided evidence, which is the reason why the Supreme Court said that Rwanda is not a safe country. So they have operational experience. They are there on the ground in Rwanda, working with Rwanda in order to help the Rwandans basically to protect refugees. Because exactly as you said about Europe doesn't take its fair share, the UK definitely doesn't take its fair share. The vast majority of refugees around the world are accommodated in countries that are really, really poor, basically, countries that are themselves quite unstable. The 2 biggest refugee hosting countries in the world at the moment are Turkey and Iran. And so most of the Afghan refugees are actually hosted in Iran. And actually, insanely, a lot of Iranian refugees are hosted in Afghanistan, right? Because people, generally speaking, stay in the country closest to the one they've just fled. People don't tend to flee very far in most cases, right? So a lot of refugees are hosted in Rwanda, and the UN operates schemes where Rwanda, as compared to, say, Afghanistan, is more capable of hosting refugees. So it does help to share responsibility, and it is part of those schemes to do that. And that involves building capacity in Rwanda and also sometimes bringing refugees to Rwanda. The very big difference between that and the UK palming off our responsibilities as one of the richest countries in the world onto one of the poorest countries in the world, Rwanda, and sending all of the people who are seeking asylum in the UK to Rwanda against their will is just completely different. And James Cleverly or anybody else who pretends to think that that is the same is having a laugh. Like, no, everybody can see the massive difference between the UK palming off our responsibilities and bribing a poor country like Rwanda to take in all of our refugees, and the UN operating a system to share responsibility among the poor countries of the world who host the vast majority of refugees in the first place, including Rwanda.
It was interesting to see his response to that as well, because this is why I wanted to ask you specifically as an expert, because I thought you might be able to dismantle James Cleverly's points better than the Sky News presenter did, who didn't. He seemed a bit stumped when Cleverly brought that up. I mean, Cleverly even brought up at the time that he felt that people being racist to Rwanda, and you were like, you've got an immigration policy that's clearly racist at your backing, and now you're complaining about people being racist to Rwanda.
What's racist? I'm sorry, but this drives me absolutely insane. First of all, what's racist is the fact that our immigration policies vastly harm people who are Black and brown, far more than they harm people who are white. That's racist in the first place. Another thing that's racist is that because we're rich and we have old colonial tendencies, we think we can just pay off countries around the world who are poor and who are developing and whose populations are Black and brown to take care of the other Black and brown people that we don't want here. That is racist. And it's not racist to point out that Rwanda is not a democracy, not a safe country, not a government that can be trusted, a government that perpetrates human rights abuses on a massive scale. In fact, it would be racist to pretend otherwise just because they're Black. That would be absurd. Sorry, it drives me absolutely.
No, don't.
I just lost it, but
That's
that makes me mad. Like, the idea that the people opposing the mass forced deportations of Black and brown people from the UK are the real racists. I mean, that really gets my goat.
Just to add to that, I mean, as well, like, we don't even have a legal route for people even to come to the UK as it is there? I mean, that's why there's so many people sitting on along Calais and that, trying to get across. I mean, you know, the whole. We know that the whole stopping the boat scheme can be ended overnight just by building what is it on that the French government said they're willing to help invest for us.
So you're talking about a processing center.
That's
there.
it. Thank you.
Do you
yes.
think it's important when we talk about a processing center in France? Because it sounds like the solution. I think what we need is to process people who want to come to the UK, who are in France, to bring them across here. But then their asylum claims should be heard in the UK, not in France. And I think that that's really important. So the French did offer that they would set up a facility there. I don't know how much of that was sort of rhetoric, playing the politics, knowing it wouldn't really happen. But regardless, I think a facility where people's actual asylum claims are processed there is quite dangerous as well, because it's still overseas. Our legal representatives, our legal system, you know, very hazy how it would operate there. So totally agree that we should cooperate with the French in order to process people who want to come to the UK, but then their claims should be heard in the UK. And as you say, exactly as you say, we could end the need for people to take the boats overnight if we just provided that safe route for them to cross from France to the UK. You and I take the Eurostar, you and I take the ferry. We can offer them the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that level of hypocrisy, because you also hear a number of them, including Mog, turn around and say something to the effect of, oh, we don't want people dying in the boats. And it's like, well, you can solve that. It's quite simple, but you don't want to because you think they'll start encouraging people. And what you're trying to do is palm it off on the rest of Europe to deal with a problem that's global. It's just a joke. It's not the Britain I grew up with. This is like, but then, you know, we can also turn around and say there's a lot of subtle stuff that hidden in the background that you don't see, and it doesn't come to the forefront in terms of people's views on races, on cultures, on ethnicities, on nations. But it was interesting as well to see, I don't know, I think I brought it up with you guys before we came on air. Farage got, in my opinion, got pretty nailed to the wall by Nella Rose on, and I'm sure many people are boycotting the program. Go ahead, boycott it. I'm not watching it. I'm just finding clips on I'm a Celebrity. But the most interesting thing came on when GB News tried to counter what Nella had done to Farage, where she basically said, I'm an immigrant and you're saying I shouldn't be here because I'm an immigrant. She's born in Belgium, but a thick South London accent. And raised here from a young age, from what I can tell, immediately from birth. So, like, she is British and London. I mean, you might as well say that Boris Johnson's American. What conservative's going to turn around and say that? It's the same sort of principle. Of course, there's hypocrisy. But it was interesting as well afterwards. GB News came to the rescue of Farage almost immediately from that conflict happening on screen, which looked like a disaster for Farage, in my opinion. And they got Jim Davidson, a stand-up comedian, to come on air to try and defend it. And Jim, partway through, basically said how great Farage was and how he's a great person because he can eat a penis on a piece of pizza. That was the first bit that was really weird. But the second bit was, because Nella was born in Belgium, he said, well, you know, this is typical Belgians. And the presenter had to jump in and go, no, I've just come from Belgium. Belgium's really nice. And it's like, we've got no problem with that. And it's like, they just lost Sainsbury's and they've now just allowed someone on to defend someone who, that was the other flip around. Jim Davidson tried to suggest that Nella was the real racist.
Oh, of course. It's exactly like cleverly. It's exactly like, you know, if you oppose sending refugees to Rwanda, you're the real racist. It's just intellectually so dishonest. I mean, I haven't watched the clip. But yeah, I mean, it's always this sort of, they in GB News, obviously, all they do is they try to tie it in knots and try to like do all this gotcha, you know, none of it is about actually sitting down and being like, right, what do people feel about this issue? What are the real problems they have that drive these feelings? And what are the kinds of solutions that could bring about a change, that could bring about the best outcome for most people? Like none of this debate is predicated on any of that. It's about getting your guy out front. It's about getting the most clicks. It's about getting the most views. It's about getting the most funds from the most dodgy, you know, funders in order to run your political career and get power. And that's all it's about. It's like, none of this is about helping people, not British people, not migrants, certainly not refugees.
Yeah, it's about painting a narrative, painting a picture to make people think that this is the issue. This is the main issue. You know, whatever's going on in your life. No, this is what's really happening in the country. And that's something that they always do. I mean, there's sometimes maybe Talk TV aren't always like that, but most times they are. I mean, I just outright avoid both of them just because I just don't want to be fed such a terrible narrative, because I just don't see their news or information helpful or something that's going to make a difference to me or my life or anybody's lives for that matter. I just feel like they're just trying to stir up hatred amongst people, to give people a reason to bicker and argue amongst each other rather than working together to solve issues in this country. That's just all I see GB News as, really.
That's why we all try and get everyone to hail the lamp. It's a unifying product. It'll bring a community together.
Something to bring us all together at last.
But we also have an...
Oh my gosh, now we have a rival leader. We'll be divided again.
Blasphemy to bring that on. There is something else that I was going to bring up with Rwanda as well. Are you aware that I think Amnesty International and the UN and a couple of human rights organizations, plus several British newspapers, are showing that the Rwandan government is financing a group of rebels in the Congo called M23? And that the foreign secretary for Rwanda is linked as a lead to M23. Are you aware of this? And so not only that, I then dug around because I was like, so they seem to be wanting all this money to come in from the UN for infrastructure, and they're sponsoring a rebel group on their border. I thought, well, what does that rebel group want? What is their actual aim? And there was something really interesting in what they were claiming through social media. and a couple of other platforms, and from interviews. That M23 group that's operating in the Congo, sponsored by the Rwandan government, wants a territorial expansion and wants part of the Congo to go over to Rwanda. They also want the Rwandan government to take refugees, specifically the Tutsis, who were one of the groups that were badly affected during the genocide in Rwanda, into the Congo. And I'm sort of going, look, I'm happy to say that this is me going off the deep end and I'm wrong. Someone proved it to me, I was wrong, I'm fine. But it seems to me they're getting foreign investment in, building up their infrastructure, and they're sponsoring with that money a bunch of terrorists whose aim is to remove those refugees at a later point, so they're left with all the infrastructure. I'm going, look, I could be completely wrong, but I've never heard of a terrorist group demanding that a group of refugees be taken into another country. And we're clearly sponsored by that country, by Rwanda. Am I going mad here? Is this like going down the rabbit hole too much? Or is this just like, I feel everyone's being heavily played and the Rwandan government are making money from the UN, from the UK, and anyone else who's chucking cat? Israel financed some of the infrastructure projects in Rwanda to take refugees.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring that up because I don't know about your theory, but it could be true. I mean, what I would say is that what we know for sure is that Rwandan government is not a trustworthy partner, and we have that evidence from they had this deal with Israel. It was very similar to what we're proposing to do. Israel said, we're going to send our refugees, the people who come seeking asylum in Israel, we're going to send them to Rwanda. You're going to take care of them. We're going to pay you. You're going to give them a place to live. Rwanda says, yeah, great, send them over, give us the money. And then it turns out what they were doing was they were forcibly beating those people up, taking away their papers and kicking them out of the country. So we know that the Rwandan government has precedent of doing exactly what you're saying, Alex, like taking the money, signing the deal, presenting themselves as a humanitarian partner on a deal like this with a richer country, and then screwing over the people. And there being nothing to be done about it. And let's be clear, we've already sent the Rwandan government 140 million pounds at least. We don't know what else, because we've also built, these big asylum compounds. That awful picture of Suella Braverman doing ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
That's all stuff that our British money has paid for to build, right? We're proposing to pay per person individually to bring every single one of these refugees over to Rwanda, pay for their integration, their education. That's jobs. That's loads of money for the Rwandan economy. So whether they were to then eventually, I think it's quite evident that the refugees wouldn't be safe there, but whether some of them would be able to stay, or whether there is a dastardly plan to literally deport them all en masse, who knows? Whatever happens, as we know, the Rwandan government is absolutely laughing here. They've laundered their image. They've prevented the UK government from being able to criticize their human rights record, and they've made a ton of money off of us to boot. And what have we got out of this? What have our communities got out of this? And what have refugees got out of this? What solution has been found on the basis of this? This is all just the Rwandan government absolutely playing everybody else. It's ridiculous.
Your theory, is like Zoe said, it's entirely possible. It just all stinks of corruption. Nothing feels right at all when the way Zoe breaks it all down like that. It's just I don't know what really more to add than what she's already said. It is infuriating that our taxpayer money is just kind of just going down the drain. And as crazy as it sounds, as you said, to 180 million, but it would not surprise us long after, God willing, that we have the Conservatives are gone at the next general election, and there's more investigations and more corruption, and what the Conservatives have been doing behind closed doors, and that we find out. Obviously, the money that's we already know that's been wasted by the British government here in the UK. But how much has been wasted abroad?
Let me return to the Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership. So 2.5 years after the previous government launched it, I can report it has already cost the British taxpayer £700 million in order to send just 4 volunteers. Those costs include £290 million payments to Rwanda, chartering flights that never took off, detaining hundreds of people and then releasing them, and paying for more than 1,000 civil servants to work on the scheme. A scheme to send 4 people. It is the most shocking waste of taxpayers' money I have ever seen. Looking forward, the costs are set to get worse. Even if the scheme had ever got going, it's clear it would only cover a minority of arrivals. Yet a substantial portion of future costs were fixed costs. For example, the annual direct payments to Rwanda, the contracts for escorts, the staffing in the Home Office, the detention and reception centres and more. So the taxpayer would still have to pay out no matter how few people were relocated. And most shocking of all, over the 6 years of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership forecast, the previous government had planned to spend over £10 billion of taxpayers' money on the scheme. They did not tell Parliament that. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Rwandan government for working with the UK in good faith, because the failure for this policy lies with the previous UK government. It has been a costly con, and the taxpayer has had to pay the price.
I dread like the total numbers, because we're probably talking like trillions and trillions of British taxpayers' money wasted on a global scale. Never mind just what's happening in Rwanda. So it's
You're absolutely right to say that. I mean, we have already got lots of deals that we're part of. So they're presented as EU deals with other countries. They're called migration management partnerships. Basically, it means you keep your people in a prison. You don't let them leave the country and make their way potentially over to Europe or over to the UK. And that involves funding dictatorships to the tune of millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds. And we are party to those deals and pay for that. And that's outside, that's all around the world. It doesn't work. It obviously kills people. It obviously props up dangerous regimes that create the instability that people inevitably have to flee from. So it's obviously counterproductive. But also, I mean, here in the UK, if you look at the situation, government decided a couple of years ago they were going to stop processing people's asylum claims because they were going to send everybody to Rwanda, in theory, right? They knew that there were massive obstacles to that ever happening. But in the meantime, they said, we're going to pile people up in the asylum system and we're going to put them into hotels. And that's been extremely convenient for a couple of private hotel owners and contractors who run those hotels. And Clear Springs is just one of these private companies have been running these contracts to run these hotels in terrible, despicable conditions for asylum seekers. They've just announced profits this year, profits of £65 million. And that is money that has gone from the public purse directly to them in order to house asylum seekers in misery, in squalid conditions. And that's gone out of the public purse right now. It belongs to these millionaire owners of this private company, right? So this is actually it's much more than just cruelty for the sake of the political theatre of it for refugees, which is of course very beneficial to the government as well. It's also about enriching, taking money out of the public purse and enriching private companies through totally unnecessary policies like keeping refugees for years at a time in a hotel room. We don't need to do that. We could put that money into local authorities to provide decent housing. We could be making asylum decisions much faster to get people through the systems so they're not reliant on that housing for so long. There are tons of ways in which we can do this in a not-for-profit way that keeps the money from like our public purse in our communities in order to support newcomers. But instead it's been used to extract that money out. And I'm not going to go on about all the numbers and all the companies, but like surveillance equipment, technology for border equipment, training of border guards, all of this is an industry, all of this is jobs, all of this is profit. And it is so entrenched within our systems that the cost of keeping people out falls upon obviously the people who are killed by those policies, but also upon, the British taxpayer, the European taxpayer, and the profit of keeping people out and pushing people back is raked out of the system by these private company owners.
We did for a while a thing of marry, sex, kill, but instead of kill, we said send them to Mars because likelihood.
But you can't have any fun anymore, can you? God,
I know.
Damn snowflakes on the right. They were always saying they were on the left, but they're on the right, actually.
It's projection. That's what they do.
However, I'm going to throw a curveball, go to Marina first. How did it feel calling Jacob Rees-Mogg a liar to his face?
You think you know better than the British people?
I think you lied to people and they believed you.
I think the British people are more intelligent than that. The British people weighed up Brexit.
Are you telling me they should have known to know you were a liar?
It was satisfying, but not satisfying enough. There was so much more that I had to say to him, and 9 minutes is just, I had so many things, so many punches I wanted to land on him, which is probably why I carried on even when they were going into the break and
into the weather.
my co-partner, my podcast co-partner Gemma Forte said it sounded like they were dragging you out, like, you know, because I just kept going. But he is a slippery eel of a man, and because I was brought in to talk about culture wars. They thought I was going to be talking about Roald Dahl. I was like, I'm absolutely not doing that for 9 minutes. But it was great. But I still think back and I'm like, gosh, you should have said this. You should have said that. Got caught up in some of the detail. But what can you do? Did my best.
You did a great job. What can I ask? What did you get to meet him before or after the show?
So there was about a minute. No. Oh, and by the way, the green room at GB News is a cesspit. It's basically, I looked up, I saw there was Nigel Farage was in the office, I saw Dan Wootton, Amanda Patel, that freak priest dude, like they were all there, and I'm just like, get me out. I'm like just staring down at my phone, like, don't look up. Every time you look up you see another shill, like, just don't look up.
It's a circle of hell.
And then I was brought in to the studio where Jacob Rees-Mogg was, and it's a strange studio because there's not a single cameraman or woman. It's just all mechanical, basically, like automatic. And I said to him, there's no camera crew here. He said, no. I said, what happens if I launch across the desk and throttle you? And he's like, well, we won't be doing that, will we? But I was fuming, like I was so angry with him. I still am. And in fact, breaking news here first, exclusive, they asked me to go back on with him yesterday to talk about the fact that he obviously is positioning Boris Johnson as a completely innocent man, and the Partygate inquiry is a kangaroo court. And again, I would love to talk to him about that, but I can't and won't do GB News again.
Don't blame you. Did they drag you out?
No, they didn't drag me out. No, it was fine, civil, but I've never been somewhere where you normally get sort of accompanied out, taken to your car. I was just like left. I was like, oh God.
I'm laughing in support.
Oh no, it's fine. But I feel like everyone hated me in there.
Everyone loved you outside of it. Everyone was like, yes.
Oh, bless you.
Say more. Like, I was like, yeah, it was wonderful. Like, that man. Just.
I know you don't want to go back on, and you said on the show you don't want to go back on, but I think many people would like to see you back on it if you
round two.
I would respect you if you do reconsider, because they need people to challenge them. The head of the Reform UK party went on. Rejoin EU party. Sorry, sorry, Alex. Was on, and he's going to kill me.
That's quite the switch.
Was on, and he stood up to them.
I can't because of who backs it. I can't because of I don't want to give them validation. I don't want to drive viewers to their show. Like, there's all sorts of reasons that it doesn't sit right with me. I would happily debate Jacob Rees-Mogg outside of GB News.
We brought this up with Gemma as well, and we're going to segue beautifully to Jennifer on this, because Gemma also called Richard Tice a liar repeatedly, which was just beautiful, and even he seemed discombobulated. Beautiful word. The thing I also noticed, like what you said there as well, Marina, was he was expecting you to talk about Roald Dahl and the culture wars. It was really interesting. You outed him, and it was almost like his brain couldn't compute. Like, he really seemed to struggle. He started rattling on about Roald Dahl's book when you literally just insulted him, which was just deranged. And again, this also beautifully links in. Jennifer, first of all, do you think any of those lumbering knuckleheads would be able to get into Oxford if you were the person in charge to select them? So Jacob Rees-Mogg did history. I think Boris did PPE. Cameron did.
No, he did classics.
Oh, he did classics. Yeah, because he compared himself to that Roman dictator, didn't he?
Yeah. A lot of them did PPE, and as I said, I taught PPE for 6 years, and I mentioned that I believe it's the Financial Times, but they wrote the article saying the course that ruined the country. Brilliant article, recommended for every student. Give it to every student on the first day. Welcome everyone. Hope you're settling in. Here is an article, and no one here is turning out like this. I will refuse to allow my students, because there's 40 different colleges. And I'm not going to go around naming certain colleges that have produced the most prime ministers, but there's certain colleges, but that was not the college that I teach at. But like I only have like only 5 rules, and I think they think I'm like an ogre before they meet me. Just like hand your essay in on time. This, I won't correct it if it's this, blah blah blah. But the 5th rule is, it just says ego. I have no room for ego in this tutorial room. I have no room for ego in this lecture room. If you are severely attached to your ego, please leave it at the door and you can pick it up on the way out. But it will not be taking place in this classroom.
I have a question related to that. Do narcissists know that they're narcissists? Does Boris Johnson know that he's a narcissist? Does Jacob Rees-Mogg know?
Well, don't they say narcissists don't? If you ask yourself the question, isn't it? If you ask yourself the question, am I a narcissist?
Then you're not.
You most likely are not the narcissist, because you're even reflecting on the fact a narcissist would never be like, am I the narcissist? But most of the time they truly, that's the, again, I'm speaking like I'm some kind of psychology like major, like but most of the time I think that the really worrisome part is that they truly believe, like these true like as in personality disordered, like diagnosed personality disordered narcissists, and they know they're manipulating to a certain extent, but it's not.
They definitely don't have the ability to empathize, which is something you get all the way
through.
There's a book which is, I've forgotten who's written it now, but it's about people, particularly men, who go to those sort of public schools and how they have sort of the emotion like crushed out of them. Was it George Orwell? I think it might have been, who basically the other boys found out that he liked butterflies, and as soon as they found that out about him, they absolutely annihilated him as a result. And that was anything. You couldn't show any weakness, you couldn't show any sensitivity. It was been beaten out of you in those places. So which is there is some thinking behind this, which is why we get people who come from that sort of public school background, which are sort of compassion free zones, because they were sort of conditioned to be that way.
Alongside like the emotional aspect, one aspect of, because a lot of them went to the public schools, as you call them here, and then go on to either this university or the other, but one of the things that I really do notice is, because we have the tutorial system, it is, you have to write a 2,500 word essay every single week for 2 classes. And so that didn't happen in my undergrad. Like I might write 2,500 words like once every like 3 weeks for a class. And you have to then go into the tutorial and defend it, usually one-on-one with the lecturer. Now, there's no way any human can keep this up for 8 weeks and know exactly, while just maintaining any kind of social life or just like being a healthy human being. So you actually have to, one of the skills that you learn in the tutorials is the ability to waffle, or the ability to go back and forth with experts on like really high topics without actually knowing too much about it. And you do that after 3 years, like 3 years, every single week, 2 tutorials on 2 separate topics, writing the essays and then going in and having to defend it. That's why they can just, like, sometimes exactly. I look at,
point. I was going to say, I've said the same thing before about the debating societies, that so many of these people, because they are taught to argue the thing they don't believe in with such conviction, and then they carry it through into life, which is that, I mean, it's a skill, but it's also it's a deception skill.
Yeah, so it really, like, there's that. I sometimes look at, I've said it so many times about, God, so many Tory prime ministers after the biggest scandals. I've said to people, I don't know how, when the chamber's packed and like all the cameras are on and we're all waiting like to comment or something, I'm like, how on earth are these people walking to the podium? I would just run away. I'd be on a flight to Mongolia. You'd never see me again. I wouldn't be able to stand up in front of everyone and make a defense and lie or do it. But they're so used to it. It's nothing to them.
This is the problem, because people like you and I wouldn't be able to do it. and we wouldn't necessarily even put ourselves forward for that role. Even Chris Bryant, I think Chris Bryant was actually asked, would you stand as a Labour leader? No, I think Chris Bryant is actually a very impressive Labour politician. And the fact that he's like, oh gosh, no, not for me, is so symptomatic of the problem. You know what I mean? So symptomatic of the issue that well, people who are most deserving of leadership positions won't put themselves forward for it. And the ones that aren't think they're absolutely like perfect for the role. And that gets us in the pickle that we are. It's the same thing about loud voices, isn't it? Like, my husband's an introvert. He's so reflective. He's so analytical, and yet he never really truly believes in himself. It's always the ones that are self-reflective and stuff that don't put themselves forward for the big stuff. So I've just sort of not smashed my husband there a little bit, but yeah.
No, it's true. It is, and it's the same. And you can see it developing within the universities, and I feel really bad now. I don't know the author of this book, but it's called Chums. The author went to Oxford, and he was the editor of the Cheryl, the magazine here. So he do you have the name?
Simon Cooper.
Cooper, yeah. Yeah, so I read it last year, but it's and I believe that the subtitle is how the Oxford Union, how
a tiny cast of Oxford Tories took over the UK.
Yeah, and so it basically is saying it's not the Oxford University that created Brexit, it's the Oxford Union, and it's a phenomenal book, and it looks at, he was there during Johnson's time, Gove's time, and he looks at Johnson running for president of the union and failing first. It's the exact same thing as what happened in his prime ministership. Then he got it again, and everyone on his slate in the Oxford Union was everyone who was his in his cabinet. So it's just another extension.
It's a frat house. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. So, and that's why they're standing up there, using all the skills they learned in the tutorials, with all the people around them that were, in the tutorials with them, or in the Oxford Union with them.
Can I just say something? About that, just to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah,
I was watching PMQs this week, or watching part of it, and I was really disheartened by the theatre. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be much better? Maybe it wouldn't be very theatrical, it wouldn't be very interesting to watch, but wouldn't it have been better if Keir Starmer stood up, asked a question, and Rishi Sunak or whoever was opposite or filling in for the Prime Minister that day would say, yeah, that's an interesting question. Here is the answer.
Yeah.
Like as if, if you were, in a meeting and you asked your boss, okay, how are we going to achieve this goal or whatever? And they actually answered the question. I'm not saying I understand politics is about, dodging and whatever, but while it would make it'd make pre-MQs pretty boring, but wouldn't we be better off with something like that?
Yeah. What is the purpose of it in its current state?
Yeah, there is no
apart from it being a clown show. I don't understand the purpose of it, and it's really descended into just point scoring and coming back with some sort of dig against Corbyn or something, or some Captain Hindsight. It's sound bites. We've got a government by soundbite at the moment.
Yeah, and it's always been like that historically. Part of the sort of philosophy of Parliament, from my understanding, which is essentially you make sure there's someone holding you accountable. You're not just sat there having people all agree with you. And also the idea is, if you mess up, we've got an instant replacement that's been analysing all your work and figuring out all your faults. That would be the sort of philosophical idea behind it. I'm not saying it works. It clearly doesn't. I don't think it's ever really worked, because how do you force someone to give you an answer?
Alex, it's even worse now. I was trying
it's all.
I don't think it's ever been good, personally. I think
we've got a Home Secretary that just last week said an outright lie. She said that so in terms of the migration applications and the amount that we processed first time around had dropped, so the backlog had dropped by 17,000. Outright lie. Yvette Cooper stood up, said as much, corrected it. The Speaker gave Suella Braverman the opportunity to correct the record, and she shook her head
when she said the asylum initial decision backlog is down 17,000. Now, the asylum initial decision backlog is clearly defined by the Home Office as the total backlog of initial decisions before and after June of last year, and the Home Office figures show that it has gone up from 132,000 to 137,000 for main applicants since the beginning of December, and it has gone up from 160,000 to 172,000 for all applicants in the first quarter of this year. On either measure, that backlog is up and not down. I raised this as a point of order on Monday, and the Home Secretary refused to correct the record then. I have written to the Home Secretary this morning, but still heard nothing back. And the Ministerial Code requires that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. I know the Home Secretary has a history of breaching the Ministerial Code, but, Madam Deputy Speaker, would you agree that facts matter, that it is not acceptable for ministers to fail to correct the record if they have given inaccurate information to Parliament? And have you heard from the Home Secretary about her intention to come and correct the record?
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her point of order. As has been said before, and I think this was said when she raised the point of order yesterday, it's obviously not for the Chair to adjudicate in cases of differing interpretations of statistics. That said, if a minister has made a mistake in the House, I would, of course, expect them to correct it. The Right Honourable Lady has put her perspective on the record. Ministers will have heard it, and I am sure the Home Secretary will reflect on whether a correction is required in this case.
Now, what's the point? What's the point?
No, it's a waste of time. I've covered it on my channel a number of times, where the speaker stands up and says, "Would you like to correct the record?" No response. Well, we can't really debate. We can debate the figures, but we can't. Yeah. No, it's not a debate. Either the numbers went up or the numbers went down.
An interpretation, no.
And Suella Braverman didn't stand up and say, "No, your data is wrong, and this is the data I'm using." No, there wasn't a debate. It was like, I'm not actually going to answer the question.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
move on.
But there's another problem with these flaccid speakers. Like they do nothing. They're absolutely useless.
The only time I ever feel that you actually get somewhere, and it's not always, the general election, when they're on TV and they're having to be really held to account. But there are failures. I am fuming with the BBC. Boris lied about Russian interference twice. She allowed Boris to get away with Russian interference. The person pulled him up and said, "Why haven't you released the report?" And he goes out and says, "I've seen nothing in the report that suggests there's Russian interference." The report comes out and it says there's Russian interference. But it's worse than that, because you've actively avoided going into further detail. And in the end, I did a video on it, and in the end I had to go and I went off and read the US Senate report, the Mueller report, watched a bit on CNN and a bit with Hillary Clinton, and got more out of that about the state of Russian interference over in the UK from America than I did from the UK report. And in fact, last week we had Ben from SMR Radio come on and say it's better to go and read the news in Europe or in the States.
Of course it is. Their analysis of Brexit is also accurate.
Yeah.
Whereas we're
because they don't have to sell anything.
Yeah. And then have you seen? Sorry, just on the topic of our gutter press, Daily Mail. It's got a new journo in town.
Shock.
It is going to be exactly what I think. Hi folks, Boris Johnson here. I am thrilled to be asked to contribute a column to the Daily Mail. It is going to be completely unexpurgated stuff. I may even have to cover politics, but I'll obviously try to do that as little as possible, unless I absolutely have to. I'm much looking forward to making my first contribution to those illustrious pages on Saturday. Join me in the Daily Mail on Saturday.
And the video, it's like the 30-second trailer for... There's no words, but yet there are all words.
But the advisory body said you shouldn't have actually done this. You're actually in breach of.
He's now in breach of
But
So
it's
I
only
just heard that
advisory,
before
so
he
it's
came
not going to
on.
make any
Do
difference.
you know what? I'm so sick of this shit. All of them breach it. Nadine Dorries did the same thing with Talk TV. She didn't give enough notice.
Coming up on tonight's programme, as you were, Sunak's stability extends to the cabinet with the big beefsteak and all cages, but Braverman back at home in the Home Office. Sorry, I've just completely messed up.
At least hers was longer than 30 minutes. He gave them 30 minutes notice. What is the point in having a committee in place that has got no teeth? Like, it can't, there are no sanctions.
And
Or even when
Nadine
there are
hasn't
sanctions.
formally even resigned.
No,
She's
I know.
still like one job in, one job. She's like,
She's
"Ah,
not. So the word on the street is that she's going to potentially delay that till the autumn, because Sunak wanted to get them all out, bish bash bosh, 3 in one day, and then it just like, if it was a hammer blow, take it all at once. Where she's going to drag it out.
October.
That's the thing.
The rumor I'm hearing is that it'll be in October when they have the. Is it okay to say National Conservative Nazi?
Conference?
Yeah,
Nazi conference.
Conference. Fucking idiots. It says so much, doesn't it? We have segued quite a bit, but I'm going to bring it back because there was a question I was going to bring to Jennifer, which is, how did it feel to utterly destroy Richard Tice?
You recently accused our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, of hijacking the Brexit issue and claimed that the amount of trade crossing the Irish border was, to use your own words, and I quote, irrelevant. Can I say, as a point of information, there is no such thing as an Irish land border. It is a UK border imposed on the island of Ireland. The Irish border is the sea. If you think it is irrelevant, can you now speak to the social and political implications to the people of Northern Ireland if a hard border is introduced, if you care so at all?
A picture tells 1,000 words, right? Think of a glass jar with 1,000 Smarties in it.
I was going to note your analogy, which was horrific, by the way.
Oh, hang on. 1,000 Smarties. Those Smarties represent all of the trade that goes across all the 28 countries in Europe. Okay? The trade that goes across that Irish border is between 1 and 2 Smarties. It is a tiny, tiny amount.
How dare you? This is not about economics. I've asked you about the social and political implications for the people of Northern Ireland if a hard border is introduced.
It's not going to be introduced because everybody has said it's not going to be.
When you say everyone's not said it's going to be, that's not what Jean-Claude Juncker has said. He said there has to be. We can't just have animals coming across the border without being checked.
I'm glad you know better than the people of Northern Ireland, the politicians of the Republic of Ireland. And
everybody has said they're not going to impose a hard border.
The head of the police force in Northern Ireland says he worries this could be a trigger for violence. Is he part of a Remain conspiracy as well?
I don't... Look, the reality is...
Well, you know more about policing in Northern Ireland than the head of the police.
No, of course I don't. But there is no reason for that to be the case.
So when Assistant Chief Constable Barbara Gray, who heads up the counter-terrorism unit in Northern Ireland, says we predict that a 6 to 12-month period, if there's a no-deal Brexit, there could be an upsurge in violence. That doesn't worry you at all?
Look, of course everybody should be worried if,
You don't sound very worried. You just made an analogy about Smarties, and we're talking about the return of violence.
I used an economic point.
But we're not talking economics. That's what
let's go back.
Let's talk about violence. Before I go back to the audience, let's deal with the violence point. Then we have to move.
No one wants violence. Let's be very clear.
Yes.
But let's go back.
People are warning of violence, Richard. What do you say to them?
Oh God, many moons ago when I came, it just came from my office is right opposite the union. And to be honest, I actually did not even know too much about him other than like a few articles I'd read being like, this guy seems like pretty much an idiot. And it just like a small background into the Brexit scenario was that I kept quiet when people say to me, "Oh, you're interfering in UK politics." I'm like, "Oh my God, it's almost like I've lived here for 15 years." So shocking. And also, even if I didn't live here, I'm like, I lecture on politics. I didn't become a lecturer on politics not to have an opinion on politics. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, so like that alone. But when the referendum came about, I actually didn't say anything. I was in the middle of my research, so I wasn't doing much. Like, I actually didn't do any public tweeting or saying something, because I actually, and this might be controversial, but like regarding the Leave and Remain, but of course I was Remain. But I do believe that every country has a right to decide whether they want to be in a regional bloc or not. Like, that's why Article 16 exists, be it like ASEAN, CARICOM, the Arab League, the EU, it doesn't matter. Every country has a right to decide. But there's leaving and then there is leaving. So there's like leaving, bye guys, thank you for having us. We're going to have to like make trade agreements. Let's do this. Not, we've got a border issue. Let's, get the best for our country. And then there's like guerrilla warfare leaving, what we saw, like literally taking everyone out, like the most unnecessary way. Of course, I didn't in no way wanted to, like, I was absolutely gutted when I saw that it was leave. But when the issue of the border came up, I was like, okay, now you have me. Now I will be publicly speaking, because my grandmother lives up like right on the border. My mother grew up on the border during the Troubles. Like they still remember, like, putting the couches up against windows, for bombs. So it was like, and for my grandmother, yeah, she wasn't alive then, but her family had a tailor shop. Her father had a tailor shop, and her siblings were, of course, Irish family, like 11 siblings, but some of them were alive during the 1916 rising. And my great grandfather was the last person to dress Padraig Pearse before he was executed. So their tailor shop was blown up in the 1916 rising, and then they moved to what would become the border. Like, talk about, like, so she saw all of that. Yeah, she saw the Troubles. Then saw the Good Friday Agreement, the removal of the border, and she just celebrated her 93rd birthday. I had it up on Twitter. She was like, massive glass of gin. Like, she's going to outlive us all. She's amazing. And she was just like, she's like, we basically always say to her, you're going to outlive us all. But she said about Brexit, may the good Lord take me before a hard border comes in. She's like, I do not want to be like, the fact that I was like, this woman is going to see a hard border come back in, like, inches from her. So that's how I got like really, really into it. But then, so I was just like, it was so personal regarding the ties thing. And I had just given like a full lecture, as I said, to politics, economics and philosophy students. And he tried to, this is what set me off. When he tried to explain to me economics through a jar of Smarties, I was like, how I didn't go, like, as you said yourself, Maria, go for a lunge. Like, how I didn't just jump up on stage. It's like, excuse me? Like, how patronizing. And then my childhood friend is beside me. If you watch the video, she's like, she's my childhood friend since I was 10, like, in Ireland, but she lives in London. She's like, oh, here she goes again. You can see her, like, oh Jesus, yeah, this is Jennifer. Oh, she's off. You can just see her putting her head down. It's like, she knows.
Yeah, but it was this thing of like Brexiteers in England who didn't know anything about Northern Ireland, didn't know anything about Ireland. Like, and as an Irishman, I was pretty upset when I was hearing Brexiteers like saying, "Oh, we'll sort that out after." Like, do you not understand the importance of the Good Friday Agreement? Of course, Dominic Raab had never even read it, and when he was challenged, he was like, "Yeah, I refer to it from time to time."
Well, it's
35 pages.
Could I just ask you, since you had such a critical role as the Brexit Secretary, I presume that in fact you had read the Belfast Agreement. Please don't line up behind the Immigration Minister and tell us that you haven't read the agreement.
I haven't sit down and started at the beginning and gone through it, but of course at various points in the negotiations, when issues have been raised, it has been an important opportunity to delve in to the different aspects, very carefully.
So which aspects of so you haven't read the Belfast Agreement in its entirety?
I haven't sat down and gone from, I've used it as a reference tool to make sure that I understood and could satisfy and reassure myself that in relation to the commitments that were made on both sides in relation to the joint report in December, which was the basis of what we were going to do on the backstop, that we're not impinging on anything required by the Belfast agreement, and also to make sure more broadly, in the positive sense, that what we're doing can promote peace, stability, notwithstanding what I recognise is a difficult set of questions for the people and the communities in Northern Ireland.
So you're confirming that you haven't read the Belfast Agreement, you were the Brexit Secretary, the backstop, the arrangement with Ireland.
I'm answering all your questions to the best of my ability.
Yes,
and I'm doing it honestly.
Yes.
So it's not like a novel. You sit down and say, do you know what? Over the holidays, this is a cracking read. But it is an absolutely vital constitutional document. And I consulted it at every moment where either as of my own initiative or whether as a result of advice of officials, an issue was raised to satisfy myself that we would never do anything. Not only to undermine the letter, but also the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement, or indeed the political stability that I'm sure in good faith we all want to preserve.
Good. And could you just confirm, for the record, that you did read the provisions in the agreement which referred to a border poll?
I am familiar with those. I don't have a copy of it in front of me if you want to test me on the detail, but I am familiar with those.
Yes, and
we're running short of time.
We're running short of time. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
My actual claim to fame, if I may say so, it is that I was the one who found that video. Of him, yeah. That like how like so he's my arch nemesis. He doesn't know he's my arch nemesis. Like he's never met me, but he is my arch nemesis. And yeah. Just will not care in the slightest, but I will care. That he is my arch nemesis. But when I saw that clip, I was like, oh no, this has to be, as I said, because I work in AI, I was like, this is a deep fake, or like there's absolutely no way this is and like I'm looking, like basically looking at where his college was, like he was schooled in human rights law. I was like, so I did all the checks before I treated this. I was like, okay, I can't be like, he didn't read the Good Friday. You negotiated a 584-page document, but you didn't read like a 34-page, two of which are the front and back covers, 2 pages. And so when I found out it was true, I was like, oh, here we go. And then I just, and so like, if you just Google my name and Dominic Raab, I was like, I have never let up on it. Like I have just like any time.
But he wasn't some backbencher. He was the Brexit.
I was like, this
Brexit
is the lead.
minister.
Lead negotiator. I was like, he negotiated as I said, the 584 pages. Didn't read the only document which was the cause of contention, which then dragged the Brexit deal and negotiations out for years. Allowed all of the Republic of Ireland's money to all our resources, diplomatic agenda setting, our time, along with all the other EU countries that we had to waste. So that was one of my, like, I'm getting frustrated and heated now, but that was one of my big annoyances when the Conservatives were giving out about the EU, say the EU are stalling or the EU aren't giving them enough concessions, like, and Ireland being in the EU, like adding in that. I'm just like,
great opportunity for me to be clear that the threat to the Good Friday Agreement in the as it's reflected in the Northern Ireland Protocol has come from the EU's politicisation of the issue, and to be clear on how that's happened and why that's happened. Our commitment to the Good Friday Agreement and to avoid any extra infrastructure at the border between the north and the south is absolute. We've made that, and I've had conversations well before the issue of the internal market bill has come up on the Hill with Senate and House leaders and figures. The UK action here is defensive in relation to what the EU is doing. It is precautionary, we haven't done any of this yet, and it is proportionate. But what we can't have is, and this is contrary to the Northern Ireland Protocol and of course a risk to the Good Friday Agreement, what we cannot have is the EU seeking to erect a regulatory border down the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and Britain. I've had really good conversations and I think it's been helpful.
When it comes to Brexiteers, why is it there's this arrogance when it comes to ignorance? Like, yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm sure, like with Richard Tice or Dominic Raab, like what's your take on that?
Because I think, if we look at the cabinet and who ended up being in the cabinet following the 2019 election win, it ended up being that very small pool of people. They had a very small pool of people to choose from after they basically hemorrhaged a load of them, but after they voted against the whip. If you recall, they did the purge of the half-decent Tories. So it's, you're left with a very small pool, and these people were either massively ignorant and thick, not to know the repercussions of this, given their positions, or they knew and they were complicit, and they did what Johnson did, and they rode the Brexit wave into Downing Street into power, and that was their way of holding on to it. So I think that's it. I think that you've got people the people that Johnson ended up surrounding himself with are these, his article that he wrote, these deluded and disciplined stooges like the Nadine Dorries. But then you've got the people who are, look at Liz Truss, for example, absolutely without spine, because she saw everything she's talking about now. And my goodness, she did an interview for GB News as well. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
Yeah,
that is a person who is. I don't think I know anyone in my life who's like that, who can just ditch all of their morals, all of their principles, even though they know that there's reams of footage out there of them saying what they truly believe, and pursue something that's complete opposite, that will damage people's lives and livelihoods, etc., all in the pursuit of power, status, money, whatever. And I think that's who he ended up surrounding himself with. So you had a mixture of people, basically. None of them good.
It's interesting that you brought up the word narcissism. Well, we have brought up the word narcissism as well. And we brought up Suella Braverman, Teresa Coffey, when she got pulled up about the woman that died from starvation. Like, the news anchor who was interviewing her for Sky was almost like that clip from The Simpsons.
Tell you what, sir, from now on you'll be Homer Thompson at Terror Lake. Let's just practice a bit, When I say, hello, Mr. Thompson, you'll say, hi. Check. Hello, Mr. Thompson. Remember now, your name is Homer Thompson. I got you. Hello, Mr. Thompson. Oh, now, when I say hello, Mr. Thompson, and press down on your foot, you smile and nod. No problem. Hello, Mr. Thompson. I think he's talking to you.
We all make mistakes. I know you to be a compassionate woman. I just wanted you to talk to me briefly about Mercy Burguma. And for our viewers, Mercy was a woman who died of starvation in Scotland. Her little baby was found crying next to her. You were asked about it at the time and you didn't want to talk about it. She was an asylum seeker. Having reflected on it, what would you want to say about it?
Okay, I haven't actually been asked about this lady before, so I don't know where that's come from. But
you know who I'm talking about.
I think I know the situation, and it's a lady with immigration status that may have changed. This really is a matter for the Home Office to decide what the immigration status is for each individual. I'm conscious that people can also apply for changes to the Home Office if they are struggling with aspects of that, and the Home Office can make that change so they can get access to public funds. I'm afraid I don't know the individual details of this lady.
I understand that, but as I said, I know you as a compassionate woman. This woman starved to death with her baby next to her.
Well, I don't know the exact ins and outs. I know it happened in Glasgow fairly recently. But really, the Home Office is the person who decides on whether or not
as a human
we
being,
can do that.
What sort of society are we when a woman starves to death?
What I'm trying to say, Kay, is that when people are in very difficult situations like that and they're looking for help from the government, there are ways they can access that help, but I don't know the individual case.
But I'm asking you, I'm giving you the opportunity to be compassionate about it.
I've just said people can.
You know enough to know that this woman died and her starving baby was found next to her.
And as I've said, Kay, when people are in very difficult situations, there are ways that the government can help, but it may need an application from them to say, I need some help in this way. So I don't know the exact in there, but the government has been helping millions of people across the country. People without recourse to public funds can apply to the government to get a change in their status so they can get support.
There are procedures in place. And she's literally stumping her foot, going like empathy. Suella Braverman brought up 154 children gone missing. Where the are they? Where the are those 154 kids? And they pulled her up in committee.
Secretary, you and I both have 2 children. What would you do if one of them went missing?
Well, I would call the police immediately.
This week, there are still 154 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children still missing who were in a Home Office hotel. What are you doing to find those children?
Well, we are ensuring we use, in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking hotels, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in hotels. We are using hotels to accommodate them because of an unprecedented increase. Our first preference is to ensure that, I'm going to use a term you ask, obviously with of course due respect to the children, but our first choice, by far the best measure, is to accommodate UASCs through the local authority in foster care. And we have, it's been incredibly difficult to identify sufficient places for those children. However, we were able to get that number down to, let me just get sure that I've got the right.
According to the parliamentary answer I had, it's 154 that remain missing.
Yeah, right. Again, you asked me about this, I think, at the last session. And this is obviously an incredibly serious issue. We've worked very intensively, and we've now got that number down to 0. There are no UASCs accommodated in hotels following an intensive focus led by the Home Office to ensure that all of those children found appropriate foster care in local authorities. I'm very grateful to the local authorities who stepped forward.
With respect, Home Secretary, that's not what I asked. I'm glad that there are no unaccompanied children being kept in hotels, because none of them should be in the first place. It's entirely inappropriate that they should be housed in such a way. What I asked is, what are you doing to find the 154 children still unaccounted for?
So any child going missing is extremely serious, and that's why we work very closely, if that case arises, with local authorities and the police to operate a very robust system of missing persons protocols to ensure that the appropriate efforts are put into place to identify where they might be.
Are you aware of the names, the dates of birth of these children that are still missing?
No, I don't know. These would be operational matters for the police. It's not for me to intervene into specific details of cases.
As the Home Secretary,
to do with
your
missing
department
persons.
put these children from where they went missing. I'm asking you if it was your child that had gone missing, as it were, if it were mine, as it were, when a child I'd never met in my neighbourhood went missing. The entire neighbourhood was out looking for them. Who is looking for these 154 missing children?
Yeah, well, what I would say is we have actually no power to detain unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in these hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're suggesting, are you suggesting that we detain them in more secure accommodation?
I'm suggesting that you care when 154 of them go missing and have not yet been found.
With respect, it is incredibly difficult generally when it comes to missing persons, if you speak to the police, to trace them. It is incredibly challenging to find someone who does not want to be found.
How do you know
but however, we take this issue very seriously. When children who are in the UASC category are notified as having gone missing, we work with the police. Sometimes they are located and they are traced, but they are there is an intensive and quite extensive package of social work support, local authority support, support workers who are specially trained to look after UASCs, who provide the activities and the well-being support that's necessary to protect, to safeguard this particularly vulnerable cohort of people.
You said in your answer that some of them may not want to be found. Is that because they're afraid of being sent to Rwanda, or because they're in the hands of traffickers?
You're asking me a hypothetical question that I just simply don't have the answer to.
You don't know who these children are. You don't know why they've gone missing, and you don't know where they are.
We've also got to be really honest about the children, the profile of the children we're dealing with. The vast majority of children are 16 or 17 years old. If they've come here unaccompanied, many of them will. We also get the situation where many adults claim to be children, illegitimately so. 50% of age assessment cases are resolved in the Home Office's favour, i.e. they are actually adults. Let me just give you the profile. We're dealing here with largely 16 to 17-year-old children. They are children. We owe them legal duties. They are, as I say, largely, and as of today, the ones in our care are housed in foster care. That is by far the best form of accommodation to safeguard their needs and their vulnerabilities and to support them. But of those children who have gone missing because they were previously in hotels, there is, of course, a multi-agency missing persons protocol which is mobilised with the police and local authorities to do everything possible to establish their whereabouts.
How long will you keep looking for them?
You'd have to ask the police unless you know, but that is a missing persons protocol which the police apply, and they have to take a judgment based on the intelligence and the facts of a particular case.
It's going to be very difficult to know, isn't it, if they're in the hands of traffickers or if they're running scared of being sent to Rwanda, when you'll actually find them, isn't it?
The Home Office's position is that if you are a UASC and you are in the care of the Home Office, you're encouraged to remain within the accommodation that's being provided and not to run away. You are provided with all of the resources and the services to which you're entitled: schooling, mental health, other well-being support. There is, as I say, an extensive and a package of which I'm very proud, because we've worked hard to build that package to ensure that UASCs are properly supported. And running away is something that I wouldn't encourage or condone.
Well, for children in those circumstances, people in the sector have said that your Rwanda plan has caused such fear in those young people that that's why they're disappearing.
If you want to talk about Rwanda, I mean, the point of Rwanda is a deterrent. We want to stop people coming here on boats in the first place. We want to stop people making this illegal journey in the first place. We want to stop the people smuggling gangs exploiting vulnerable people. We want to stop them putting children on their unseaworthy vessels, travelling late at night without a life jacket, in the vain hope of getting to a life in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I know. It's shocking. And it got skipped over the news because Boris basically run roughshod over everything.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, but it's the sort of thing that people need to see, because these are the people, like Therese Coffey was in charge of, work and pensions, for goodness sake, health at one point. Sola Braverman in charge of home security. Like, these people should be nowhere near those positions where people's welfare is at stake, where a degree of compassion would be handy, and they are completely without it.
Tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.